Neva Espinoza, who's the Vice President of Energy Supply and Low Carbon Resources at EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. And we have a lot of friends here on this panel, and you all know them well, so I'll keep my introductions brief, and you can read more about them online. Next, we will hear from Mark Rodeffer, who is Vice Chair of the Sierra Club DC chapter and worked diligently to help pass the DC Clean Energy Omnibus Act in 2018 with the DC Council. Welcome, Mark. Next, we'll hear from the one and only Calvin Butler,
Really?
who is
Who
is a Senior Executive Vice President of Exelon and CEO of Exelon Utilities. He oversees the 6 local electric natural gas companies, including the one right here where we are today, Pepco. Calvin, welcome.
Thank you.
Last but not least, we'll hear from someone who is no stranger to DC and actually energy issues nationally. We are delighted to have Karen Harbert here with us. She is President and CEO at the American Gas Association. I've known a lot of these panelists for several years, maybe a decade or more. Founded in 1918, AGA represents more than 200 local energy utility companies that deliver natural gas to 178 million Americans nationwide. Please help me welcome our panelists. Thank you. I hope those online clapped as well. The way that we'll flow today, we'll ask Neva to kick us off and offer really an overview for a few minutes about where we are and where we're headed, what's technologically feasible. And then we would love for Mark, and then Calvin, and last but not least, Karen, to offer a few thoughts. I'll ask a question or two, but we want to save as much time as we can for you, so please get your questions ready. For those who are online, I understand that someone will hand me some cards with your questions, and I'd love to get them. So why don't we begin with Neva?
Great. Time check myself here. Wonderful.
Thank you.
So Colette, thank you so much, and I really appreciate being here today. Hey to everybody virtually. I'm not going to lie, it's really nice to be in person. So if you're a little jealous, I get it. I do a lot of virtual events as well. So I thought when we started this panel, it would help to start talking about where we've been in terms of our decarbonization journey and where we're going over the next decade and then the following 2 decades. So we got to start to give credit where credit is due. And here in the United States, we should actually be pretty proud of what we have accomplished in terms of economy-wide decarbonization over the past 15 years. So when you look at the United States as a whole, economy-wide, we've reduced overall CO2 emissions about 15% as compared to 2005. And the electric sector has really been a core driver in enabling that transition, with about a 35% CO2 reduction in that 15-year time frame. There's been a huge economic transition from coal to gas, build out of renewable assets, very regionally, of course, continuing to operate our zero carbon fleets, right? Continuing to safely operate our nuclear fleet as well as our hydro fleet. So all of those things have been integral to achieve that economy-wide decarbonization. But there are 2 things that I really like to point out when we talk about where we've been. And one is what else happened over that 15-year period. The first is we saw GDP grow about 24% over that 15-year period. So we did not see CO2 reduction because we had economic decline. It was actually quite the opposite. The other thing to note in that 15-year period is the average U.S. retail price of electricity has maintained essentially stable year over year on an inflation basis, meaning we didn't have overall CO2 reductions because we passed off a whole lot of costs onto the customer, right? We maintained the electric sector reliable and affordable over that time period. So when we think about what's going to happen over the next decade and how we're going to achieve a 50% economy-wide CO2 reduction, and then beyond that all the way to net zero by mid-century, we have to keep top of mind the idea of the energy system and the electric sector maintaining affordability and reliability, and we need to really weave in and consider resiliency as we think about energy moving forward. EPRI has done quite a bit of analysis to really understand how fast and how deep can we go in the electric sector to enable this transition. And then the third kind of core strategy that will enable the 2030 developments, or the 2030 decarbonization goals, is efficient electrification, where we primarily see this electrification happening in transportation as well as industry and buildings. One of the things we really need to think about and consider in that 10-year period it's an economy-wide goal of 50%. And one sector does not have to necessarily do it all, right? So we have to work across the economy. So the deeper the electric sector gets, the other sectors can do less. But if the electric sector only goes so deep, other sectors do more. Now, there's something that's really integral in that conversation, that idea of balancing the economy. And that is when we think about how other sectors of the economy are going to decarbonize, they are going to rely on the electric sector. Electrification is going to be a very big part of it, which means it's even more important that the electric sector maintains its affordability and reliability in order to do that.
Amen. Say that again.
Affordability, reliability, I cannot express how important it is, and resiliency of that system, right? If other sectors of the economy are now focused on the electric sector, then that resiliency of that sector becomes even more important. Now, the other thing to think about over the next 10 years is the decisions that we make in that 10-year period will impact the decisions we're able to make in the following 20. Right? So when we think about the investments, we think about how we do or do not maintain assets, we think about policies, we think about infrastructure, we think about permitting, right? All of those things and the decisions we make will impact what we have available to us over the following 20 years. Right? So over the next 10 years, we definitely see batteries, we see renewables, we see continuing to decline amount of coal, and we see natural gas assets being critical. We see potentially some deployment of CCS. We see extension of the nuclear life. We see potential expansion and uprating of hydro assets as we move forward. When we look beyond 2030, that's really when we need to start focusing on technologies that are not commercially available at scale today at the cost they need to be, right? And so you're thinking about things like scaled carbon capture, utilization, and storage potentially. You're thinking about advanced nuclear and how that moves forward. You're thinking about hydrogen, ammonia, synthetic fuels, biofuels, and how those scale and change the way we think about energy moving forward, where energy storage is going to become increasingly more important to ensure that reliability of the system. The last thing I'll say here, and I'm going to check my time, I'm going to cheat a little bit.
You're doing well.
Okay, I'm okay. The last thing I'd like to talk about here is, in this transition, we have the ability to make sure it is equitable. We have the ability to look at this transition and look at our energy system over the next 3 decades and design it from the very beginning to take environmental aspects into account, to take equity into account, to take workforce into account, to take all of these things into account because of all the learnings we've had over the past few decades. So I think it's a really, really exciting time for our economy. A huge amount of technology investment is happening, as everyone in this room and online is very, very well aware, but it won't be easy, right? The goals that are out there are aggressive. The technologies we need to meet the goals are not fully commercial at scale, and time to develop technology takes decades, literally decades. So this is really a time for the industry, economy, all the stakeholders to come together and tackle the challenges together as we move forward. So, Colette, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. That was terrific, Neva, and you've really so well set the stage.
Thank you.
We knew you would. And now we're going to hear from Mark, who I think might even say, we have more work to do. Mark, over to you.
That's right, Colette. We do have a lot more work to do. So as most of you probably know, DC has committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. And of all of our greenhouse gas emissions in DC, about 23% come from our fracked gas utility. The leakage of methane gas is vastly undercounted, perhaps by as much as 50%. So it's actually probably higher than 23% of our greenhouse gas emissions in DC are coming from gas. And that's particularly bad because this methane gas, when it's leaked directly into the atmosphere, is 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide as a global warming agent. So to meet our climate commitments in DC, we have to stop burning gas. There's really no other choice. And gas isn't just a threat to our climate. It's also a threat to our health. Gas appliances in our homes put out the same pollutants as car exhaust. This is things like carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, even formaldehyde. And because of this, indoor air quality often exceeds the limits for outdoor air standards that have been set by the EPA. The EPA doesn't regulate indoor air, so it's actually perfectly legal. And there's some pretty bad health impacts from exposure to nitrogen dioxide. There are things like respiratory problems and lung infections. Children have a 42% increased likelihood of developing asthma if they live in a home with gas appliances. There's also IQ and learning deficits in children. Research in Australia that came out this year found that children living in a home with gas appliances have the same likelihood of developing asthma as children who live in a home with someone who smokes cigarettes. This same research found that about 12% of childhood asthma cases are attributable to gas-burning appliances in homes. So the only way that we can deal with the climate and the health threat from burning gas is to stop burning gas. And that means electrification, which is DC's official climate policy as laid out by the Department of Energy and Environment in the Clean Energy DC plan. Now, because of the 2018 Clean Energy Bill, DC is moving towards electricity from 100% renewable sources. By 2032, we'll be getting all of our electricity from renewable sources. So this is, so when we replace a gas system with an electric system, that's a one-to-one replacement of dirty, polluting fossil fuels with clean, healthy energy. And high-efficiency heat pumps can do the job of replacing gas combustion for heating in our homes. They have efficiencies of 300 to sometimes even up to 500%. So that means that they produce a lot more heat than what they use in electricity. And as we think about transitioning our buildings off of dirty fuels, we have to prioritize low and moderate income households first. So that's for several reasons. One is the health impacts that I mentioned. They will see, these low and moderate income homes will see the greatest benefit from that because you frequently have other co-occurring health issues there, things like mold and pests and other kinds of things. We also need to do it because as we transition off of fossil fuels, the cost of maintaining our fossil fuel infrastructure increases per customer because there are fewer people using this infrastructure. So the costs are going to go up, right? So we need to make sure that low and moderate income households are not paying the bill for our expensive fossil fuel infrastructure. Now, it's going to take 30 years to do this, but we need to do the transition and we need to prioritize low and moderate income households and we need to do the retrofits in their homes at no cost to them. I think people know that Exxon and the oil companies have been lying about climate change for decades. But it's not just them. The entire fossil fuel industry is doing it. The gas industry has been gaslighting us for decades. So they say we can burn gas and fossil fuels and be carbon neutral. That's just not true. AltaGas, which is the company that owns our local gas utility here in DC, put forward a plan that they said would achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. The plan admits that in 2050, they plan for half of their energy to be fracked gas. So, it fails on its face, even if you take everything they're saying at face value, which of course at the Sierra Club we don't. But even if you did, the plan doesn't do the job. So I said that they say 50% of their energy will be fracked gas. So what's the other 50%? Well, they say they're going to do things like harness methane from cow manure at factory farms and gas from landfills and hydrogen, and they'll put that in the pipes and everything will be great. There are a number of problems with that. One is that the gas industry's own research shows that these fossil gas alternatives like manure gas could replace at most 13% of current natural gas consumption. So there's just not enough of this stuff. Other estimates that are not from the fossil fuel industry put the percentage much lower in the single digits. So it's just not a realistic alternative in terms of the amount that we have. Then there's also the cost. Manure gas and other gas alternatives cost anywhere from 8 to 17 times more than fracked gas. So it's a lot more expensive, and it certainly costs a lot more than electrification does. And then on top of that, you have the $5 billion that AltaGas wants to charge DC ratepayers just to maintain their existing fossil fuel infrastructure. It's called Project Pipes. They're doing it in stages. They're in the second stage right now. They've never given a price tag for the entire pipeline replacement plan. The Department of Energy and Environment has estimated that it's about $5 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money, and that's just to keep what we have, not to make any sort of improvements in terms of the climate impacts of the stuff that they're putting out there. So the costs of staying on fossil fuels are enormous, and we can't afford it, and we can't afford it financially, and we can't afford it in terms of our climate and our health. But the good news is that clean energy momentum is growing. 47 cities in California have committed to stop burning fossil fuels in buildings. Denver and Seattle have done the same thing. New York City is considering legislation to do it. The Biden administration, they say they want to see more use of high-efficiency heat pumps and induction stoves. And just yesterday, the EPA announced that it's no longer giving gas furnaces the highest efficiency rating in the Energy Star program. So, DC did a really good job of leading on getting electricity from renewable sources. We are a little behind when it comes to transitioning off fossil fuels to heat our buildings. And it's time for DC to step up and bring clean energy to everyone who lives and works in DC.
Thank you, Mark. We appreciate your passionate remarks and sharing the viewpoints, not only of for DC Sierra Club, but I know your colleagues nationwide. I know Glenn Hooks really well. I'm from the great state of Arkansas, and he frequently appeared before the Arkansas Commission to make those points. Thank you for your service. Next, we're going to hear from Calvin Butler. Calvin, we would love to hear your perspectives representing the operating companies and Exelon as a whole, but the operating companies, which in customer numbers equate to the largest utility in the U.S. with some 10 million customers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's truly a pleasure being here. I'm glad after Mark's comments we said good to meet you early, and no, I'm teasing. And to our commissioners and to Chairman Phillips, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate, always good to see you, sir. I have some prepared remarks, but I think the meat of this, as Colette was saying, is that it's going to be in the Q&A session. But I do want to share with you a perspective of how we're approaching electrification and give you a sense of how we're tackling this in one way, and then we'll get into the others later. But I first want to just say on behalf of PEPCO and PHI CEO David Velasquez, it's always a pleasure to be here in DC. And it's truly an honor to talk to you about one of the subjects that are important to us as an organization, and that is electrification. I want to talk to you today about it because it's truly an opportunity, but it's our responsibility to lean into this discussion. As Colette said, as one of the largest utility by operating company by customer count, and recognizing where we serve, we can't be on the sideline in this discussion. We have to lean in. Because the reality of it is we have the power to save thousands of lives. We have the power to reap hundreds of billions of dollars in health and climate benefits. We also have the power to reduce air pollution in communities of color that are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. We now have the power right now to really talk about electrification in the transportation industry. And that's what I'd like to focus the next minute and a half to really dive in on. Every year, the American Lung Association produces a report about the state of our air. Last year, in 2020, the report was called The Road to Clean Air, and it was pretty sobering. The report quantified the impact on public health from electrifying the transportation sector, which currently represents about a third of the total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Using a variety of transportation and emission models, as well as public health benefits modeling tools designed by the U.S. EPA, the report showed if we were to transition to zero-emission transportation on a widespread basis by 2050, we could add up to $72 billion in avoided healthcare costs. We could save approximately 6,300 lives and avoid more than 93,000 asthma attacks and 416,000 lost workdays every year. When I read reports like that, I immediately want to understand the potential impact on our 10 million customers, particularly in the urban areas where our 6 utilities operate. The numbers are staggering. In our service area, if our service areas were able to transition to clean transportation, we could realize more than $9 billion in avoided healthcare costs and nearly 800 prevented deaths every year in Illinois, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and right here in the District of Columbia. See, transportation electrification holds the promise of helping us meet environmental goals, reduce carbon footprints, bring life-saving cleaner air for residents, and create economic opportunity through job creation and reduced energy costs. One way Exelon is helping to achieve this is focusing on our own fleet. We have a commitment that we will electrify our transportation fleet by 30% in 2025 and 50% by 2030. Now, some of you may be saying, okay, good for you. But the reality of it is, we were one of the first, if not the first, to set a goal like that in the utility industry, in the energy sector. And since then, others have followed our lead. So it's not enough for us to sit back and say what we're going to do. We have to lead in this discussion. But understand, hitting that goal potentially avoids more than 65,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions from this year through 2030. That's the equivalent of planting and growing 1 million trees for 10 years. Our 6 Exelon utilities, including Pepco, are making this transition through a combination of fully electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and vehicles with idle mitigation units. But we have to partner with government, commercial, and other partners to make sure electrification happens on a broad scale. Neva talked about equity, because we cannot have transportation electrification just for the affluent. That means ensuring individual consumers, including the many Washington, D.C. residents listening today, have full access to electric transportation options, including, but not limited to, public transportation, taxis, and ride sharing, as well as charging infrastructure. That's part of our responsibility. And together with government and other partners, we have the power to ensure that it happens. As beneficial electrification grows, and it will grow, we will need to make additional investments in the system to ensure, once again, reliability and resilience. At Exelon, our commitment to you is that we will continue modernizing our infrastructure to ensure that it's reliable, resilient, and secure. And as we push for environmental benefits and grid resilience, we also know we have a responsibility to reach across divides to make all communities we serve stronger and more resilient. We believe we can do this. We are well on our way, but in partnership with our commercial sectors and all levels of government, we will make zero-emission transportation possible, realistic, and equitable, because we do believe we have the power to do it. And that is why we're excited about being involved in discussions like this with each of you and for those of you watching, because without being at the table, without setting forth goals that we've just set in our path to clean, we realize we do not have a seat at the table, and we don't believe it's possible to achieve these goals without having the utilities present and rolling up their sleeves and being engaged with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. All I can say is amen. I'm really delighted that you brought forward this really critical element of electrification, which is focusing on the transportation sector. Yes, we have to focus on the energy sector, but we know the greatest amount of gains we can take advantage of are in the transportation sector. And I want to highlight the electric vehicle highway. Is it the Electric Highway Coalition?
That's right.
A number of the utilities across the U.S. have been very involved in it, along with Southern Company, of which I'm a member of their board, and so I should say that in full disclosure. But I love these types of innovative ways in which we are working to make sure, thinking about the symbiotic relationship about transitioning the transportation fleet. We've got to have the infrastructure, and so thank you. Last but not least, I know Karen has been chomping at the bit to have her word here. Karen with AGA, we certainly are well acquainted with you with AGA. I should have mentioned too that before joining AGA, Karen was with the U.S. Chamber and worked a lot in the energy and electricity sector. So Karen, last but not least, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner and Chairman, for having us here today. I think it's important to hear the voice of the natural gas utility industry, so I appreciate that. Who here is an environmentalist?
None of us.
Everyone. All right. So if the objective of this panel is to talk about decarbonization, I think we heard from Neva that we need more tools, not less tools. We need to be all in. We need to examine the technologies of today and the opportunities for tomorrow. And on behalf of the 180 million Americans that use natural gas and the 5.7 million businesses that rely on natural gas, they're all in. Therefore, we're all in. It might surprise you to know that we spend $95 million a day improving our infrastructure. That means obviously making it safer, but tightening it. And that means we've been able to reduce methane emissions 70% in our systems. Those 180 million Americans at home represent 4% of America's CO2 emissions. So we have to look at other sectors. We have to look at transportation. We have to look at industry. We have to look everywhere. But from our perspective, we're all in. And we've got an energy delivery infrastructure that we're expanding every day. 50 miles. I know that's not going to be a good number for you. We add 50 miles of new pipeline every day and a customer every minute of every day. So people want this product, but they also want to have a cleaner energy future. So it is up to us in the industry to lean in and to provide these technology solutions. And we are. Today, right now, CO2 emissions are at 27-year lows in our country. To your point, Neva, we should be proud of that. We're not seeing that type of progress over in Europe that was trying to lead this climate change discussion. We can talk about what's happening in Europe right now with the huge price spikes in their energy prices right now because of a not well-balanced transition. We need to learn from that to ensure that we can help our customers maintain affordable utility bills. But we're all in. And those 27-year lows of CO2 emissions are due to three things: switching from coal to natural gas, energy efficiency, and the increase in renewables. And what we need to realize is that that increase in renewables was made possible through proactive policy and also the availability of affordable natural gas to back up those systems. We've seen these storms in the recent 12 months, whether it was in Texas or in the Gulf. When the electricity markets go down, the natural gas market is there to back it up. What if that wasn't there? What if we build out renewables without backup natural gas? We need to think very carefully about that reliability that Neva mentioned and the resiliency. January of 2018 was we had the coldest snap in our country's history up in the Midwest, the polar vortex. And during that storm, natural gas delivered home to every home that had natural gas. And I'm sorry to say the electricity market didn't respond quite as well. The National Bureau of Economic Research did an analysis of that polar vortex and found that 11,000 lives were saved because they could still heat their homes, boil their water, and cook their food. We shouldn't take those 11,000 lives for granted. But we need to do more, and we're all in. In January of 2020, our board came together and made very strong commitments on reducing methane, CO2 emissions, increasing investments in energy efficiency, and most importantly, embraced a very progressive innovation agenda. We now have 175 renewable natural gas projects up and running. This is carbon negative natural gas. We're capturing it from farms, hogways, poultry, landfills, capturing it so it's not emitted to the atmosphere. We're putting it into our systems, which means we're not using natural gas and not emitting that methane. So we now have carbon negative sources that can use today's energy delivery system. We're investing in hydrogen. The industry just came forward and put $120 million of its own money on the table to do deep dives into hydrogen and how it can be more integrated into our system. We are a solutions provider, and we are the most affordable solutions provider because we don't need to build new generation and transmission to completely wipe ourselves off the planet here. We can use today's infrastructure. If you wanted to get rid of natural gas, Nicor is the utility there, get rid of Nicor in Illinois, you would have to build 4 times the amount of energy infrastructure in Illinois. And they're simply not practical, nor is there the appetite to underwrite those costs. If we were to electrify everything, and I don't think we're all saying that, I'm saying that electricity is going to play a huge enabling role to decarbonization. There's going to be beneficial electrification, but we need more tools, not less. And we think that we have a very, very important role to play in decarbonization with advanced technologies, advanced appliances, and we need to be more inclusive in this transition. The average American family that uses natural gas in their home versus an all-electric home saves $879. That's real money for real people that could use it for rent, medicine, education. So we really need to be inclusive in this transition, not exclusive. It can't be a transition for the affluent. It has to be a transition for everyone. And because of our affordability and our already paid for infrastructure, we think we have a big part to play. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. My goodness. You delivered. I want to pose one question to you, Karen, because you're talking about being inclusive, being innovative. I should mention, too, that EPRI is co-leading the Low Carbon Resource Initiative with the Gas Technology Institute. So I'm thinking about these new and innovative ways in which we are all leaning in, doing something different, doing more, investing more. I read an announcement, maybe it was last week, where Williams is partnering with Ørsted to focus on adding offshore wind. And we're seeing lots of examples of co-location of renewables and gas, renewables and storage, renewables, storage and gas. So I want to ask you to speak a little bit about how the gas sector is working in that way.
Sure. The permutations are endless.
Yeah.
Battery storage, gas, renewable, I mean, we go on, and that underscores the point is we're going to need it all. There is not one single bullet. There's buckshot out there. And we need to gather all of it to be able to get to where we all want to be. And we're investing in that low carbon resource initiative. We're encouraging the Department of Energy to invest more money in R&D. We've been very vocal advocates up on Capitol Hill to have a more dedicated investment in R&D in terms of the gas sector and what that looks like. We are partnering with wind. I mean, many of my member utilities are co-locating at some of these offshore wind facilities to be able to generate new sources for this transition. But I think it's really important to understand the commitment to innovation. To Neva's point, we've got technologies today that we can use, and we are. We're proving out RNG, we're proving out hydrogen, we've got more advanced appliances to put into people's homes. But we don't have all the technologies going forward. And so we need to take the time now this decade to continue to invest in those. Look at creative public policy. And Colette, I know you can appreciate this. We need a regulatory framework that embraces that.
Absolutely.
And right now we've got, in many cases, a regulatory framework that's based on 30 years ago. That isn't enabling. In fact, it's kind of standing in the way of some of these investments that actually need to be made. And so it's going to take policymakers, regulators, scientists, innovators, customers, us leaning in to do it all. But we can't do it without, enabling public policy and the regulatory framework. And I think, with the DC Commission, can lead on this and having these discussions. And I'm certainly sure, Chairman, when you're at FERC, you'll be pushing the FERC to be discussing how a national framework should look. But also, it's in the states, which are really either going to be leading or not. And to the 42 states, 42 cities in California that banned natural gas, they actually had really robust city council hearings where people came in and said, you know what, we're not in favor of this. The restaurants weren't in favor of the home builders, the realtors who said, you know what, we want to be able to offer a home that somebody wants to buy. We can't dictate what type of home they should buy. They should want, if they want one, they should be able to buy one. But if they want a gas appliance, they should be able to have a gas appliance. And so 20 states have now passed legislation preventing energy options from being removed from customers. That you get to choose what you want, but we can't tell you what you want. And I think that's important as we look to be inclusive, that there is choice here in America. We're going to be a big part of that.
Thanks for that. I want to touch on something. A lot of you have talked about cost. We are sitting here in the District of Columbia. I said I'm from Arkansas. I'm a resident of the District of Columbia. Let me say for the record, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Thompson, we're in the middle of a pandemic. in the middle of a recession.
Yeah.
And we have to focus on cost and what this evolution and this transition we all agree must occur. What is the impact on the least among us? And how are we factoring that into our daily work? And so I want to ask each of you if you have any thoughts about where those synergies may lie in where we can gain greater traction focusing on decarbonization or electrification while keeping cost in mind.
As a utility, if I can jump in, that is what drives so many, if not the most important piece of our decision making. Because during the pandemic, what was highlighted more than anything else is how our customers were suffering. Yeah. And when you sit back and you can't pay your electric or your gas bill, but yet you're working from home, trying to work, and your kids are being educated from home, what can you do? So we leaned in earlier and working with our respective commissions and our jurisdictions and stakeholders and said we were going to be part of that solution. But to your question is going forward, it revolves around a couple of things. Innovative programs such as time of use rates, innovative programs such as our energy efficiency efforts, because driving down use is a huge cost saver of putting money or keeping money in people's pockets. In addition to that, developing programs in partnership and collaboration with our commissions in terms of what can we do to make homeowners, especially low income or under-resourced people, homes more efficient, provide them incentives to get new technology installed into their home, being a partner with them and communicating with them in real time about their energy usage. So we have developed ways now where people know if they're on a budget building process, where you are at any given time in the month to where their usage is. And how can we help them regulate what they're using, so not to punish, but to inform. And those are some of the things of how the utility is leaning into this effort. And that is where you talk about the partnership with the commission is critical, because that's a different way for us to engage than has been traditionally in the past. And that is forward looking as opposed to backwards looking. And that's what we got to get better.
Absolutely. I embrace that, Calvin. When I was chair in Arkansas, we developed the first comprehensive energy efficiency program.
I know.
Not as far advanced as in the Northeast, but you got to walk before you can crawl. And it was a collaborative process. It wasn't an adversarial process. We brought in folks who were the experts. So I really embrace what you said. And Karen, you too, about the ways in which policy can support and regulators can support rather than inhibit this work. Any other thoughts before I go to another question?
Well, on the cost question, I mean, as I said in my earlier comments, I mean, we absolutely need to focus on low and moderate income homes, and we need to do these retrofits in a way that at no cost to them, and not just focusing on the issue of getting, the pollutants, the fracked gas out of their house, but the other issues that are going on there, and the efficiency. I completely agree with what Calvin said about, we need efficiency, things like time of use rates, so that we can keep the costs lower. Karen talked about in Illinois, which I would admit I'm not familiar with, that in Illinois, they would need a huge build out of their electric grid. As I said, I don't know much about Illinois. I know here in DC, Calvin, as you could tell us, Pepco put out a study on building electrification and transportation electrification. And what they found was that they could fully electrify buildings and electrification in DC by 2050, the goal that we need to, the date by which we need to be carbon neutral. And the load growth would be 1% a year. And they said if they incorporated energy efficiency and demand response programs, they could get it down to below 1% a year, which is lower than Pepco's load growth just a few decades ago in the 1980s, I think. So that's not going to be an extreme cost when it's 1% a year and we have 30% to do this. I mean, Pepco, Calvin, I think you would say, has no interest in frying their own grid, right? I mean,
no.
that everyone would hate you. It wouldn't be good for you financially. I mean, you guys don't want to do it, and you say you can do it 1% a year. That's pretty easy. So I think if we focus on the LMI homes and we work with efficiency and demand response, that is the approach we should take.
Thank you, Calvin.
And to Mark's point, PepCo did, in their climate policy plan, action plan, did come out and state exactly that. But I think it also goes to underscore how every jurisdiction is different. There is not a one-size-fit-all. And that's what we have to be. And I can speak to this because we operate, as I shared, in some of the largest urban areas: Philadelphia, Wilmington, Atlantic City, Baltimore, DC, Chicago. And the reality of it is the needs of that customer base in each of those is very different. How we engage and partner with our regulators is very different. So as soon as I adopt a one-size-fit-all, I get calls from the chairman saying that's not going to work here. And engaging and listening to what our customers want and need and how we can still get to the goals of that jurisdiction is really that partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I think taking that Arkansas experience, it is quite a challenge when developing national energy policy.
Right.
But certainly it should be respected. And we should challenge one another in that regard and find new and different ways. I know, Neva, speaking of challenging, where can we focus in the near term if we want to make strides with regard to electrification and be focused on affordability?
That's a great question, and there's a lot to it. So one of the things that gets lost in this conversation sometimes is how complex this really is and how much capacity is actually going to have to be added to the electric system in order to achieve economy-wide 50% reduction. So in some of the initial studies that we've done at EPRI, we've looked at both a 66% reduction in the electric sector, and in that reduction we see enhanced electrification, more electrification of transportation and buildings because the electric sector is more affordable at that rate. Right? At that point, we see about a 33% reduction in CO2 from the transportation center. We also look at an 80% CO2 reduction from the electric sector, and you see less electrification that way because electricity tends to be more expensive at that point, so you see less parts of the economy going to electricity as a decarbonization solution. So when we look at that overall balance and complexity, think about like the early 2000s when we were building out the gas fleet in the US. Our peak capacity addition at that time was about 60 gigawatts a year of firm gas capacity here in the United States. To meet the scenarios over the next decade, we're talking about meeting that amount of capacity every year starting right now, like starting 6 months ago, right? We are gonna have to build out a whole lot of capacity here within the electric system and the relevant transmission that has to go with it. So it's not a simple task. And I just think that's something is really important to keep in mind as we move forward. It is going to take investment, and it is going to take reliance on our existing infrastructure in order to do it. We need to be innovative in every way we can to reduce overall costs and utilize that infrastructure. So I like to say optionality is not an option. It is a requirement. There are going to be regional differences based on resources, based on availability of various things, based on industry in different areas. When we look at the investments that will have to be made in a location, and we need to think about that as we move forward and we're setting, whether they be national or state or local policies in some of these areas.
Thank you. And for those who are really energy nerds and geeks and tech geeks, what you also heard inherent in what Neva mentioned was the critical element of transmission planning and cost allocation, right. Resource planning, integrated resource planning. And so we have a lot of work to do yet, to hearken Mark's point as well, to get us there. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Mark, there was a question that came in, I think based upon your opening remarks. To replace a gas system with an electric system, who will pay for the HVAC system change for a low to moderate income household?
I mean, we're going to need subsidies from the public, from the government. There's no question. We cannot expect low or moderate income households to be able to do this themselves. I mean, the good news is it is going to save money, right? I mean, there's the extreme cost of manure gas. There's the $5 billion that AltaGas wants to charge DC ratepayers just to replace the existing pipes. So, if we can take a neighborhood, whether it's a cul-de-sac or an entire neighborhood, and we can transition it off of the fossil fuel system and have it fully electrified, they don't have to bear any of these extreme costs that AltaGas is trying to foist upon our ratepayers in DC. And another point about the cost savings for low and moderate income families, most importantly, but really for everyone, is the health benefits. We talked about this is really bad stuff that's being put out when we burn fracked gas in our homes. And so if we stop doing that, right? I talked about this is like growing up with someone, for a kid growing up in a home with gas appliances, that's like a kid growing up in a home with a smoker. Well, guess what? If you don't grow up with a smoker, you spend less money on things like going to the emergency room because of an asthma attack. And of course, it's not just asthma. I mean, these pollutants are linked to other diseases, things like diabetes and heart disease and hypertension. And so you will be saving costs there. Now, that's a little hard to account for, right? Because how do you account for this kid didn't go to the hospital for an asthma attack because he doesn't live in a home that burns fossil fuels? You can't really calculate that, but it will unquestionably save money. So I wouldn't look at this as something that is a cost, that costs more money. It's giving people clean energy and making them healthier and stopping this climate pollution. I mean, there was talk about we need to be inclusive. We actually need to exclude fossil fuels. I mean, that's DC's official policy, to exclude fossil fuels, and that's what the entire planet needs to do if we're actually going to address climate change.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? Someone may want to weigh in. All right. Reallocating some of the pipe replacement costs toward building electrification retrofits as non-pipe alternatives. That's an interesting one. And I've heard some of the conversation that we've had today. Mm-hmm. It's not so simple as we just heard Mark's position, so I don't want to discount that. He's saying it is simple and we shouldn't look at it as costing more but saving lives. But we also heard some say it's not as simple as you cut off this gas today and you start the electricity tomorrow. So I want to hear your thoughts about whether we should consider reallocation and what would that look like in the real world.
So maybe I'll jump in here. So I want to sort of challenge that we want to get rid of fossil fuels for just a second. Because the reality is that the natural gas or its substitute is not going to go anywhere. It's either going to come into somebody's home in the form of an electron or a molecule. You're still going to get energy, and it's got to be generated one way or another. So either you have more natural gas capacity and it comes into the home in form of an electron, or it comes in directly as it does today through a molecule. So if we look at the system and how it's all interrelated and complex, we have to figure out where we're putting the pain point. And none of this is free. I mean, if we're going to completely get rid of the entire natural gas distribution system, transmission system, and replace it with electricity, people are going to have to pay for it. It isn't free. You can't subsidize a complete replacement of the energy system. And it's power gen, it's transmission, it's distribution, and then it's retrofitting everybody's homes. And so this can't be done at the flip of a switch. And you're still going to need natural gas to back up a lot of these energy sources until we get batteries at scale that can be deployed all across the country. We're not there yet. We shouldn't be embarrassed to say we're not there yet. Yeah. I think we should be proud of the fact that we're all in and working really hard on this, because that's what it's going to take. And keeping affordability, reliability, resiliency, and decarbonization as our 4 North Stars. And you have to balance them, otherwise it gets out of whack, and you look at what's happening in Europe. Right now, you don't want it. They're going to retard their climate progress. They're turning on their coal-fired power plants as we speak because electricity prices have gotten so high. And we could go on and on. We don't want that to happen here because it is such a source of comparative advantage to manufacture things here. And we've brought back so many industries from around the world to be here because of affordable electricity and affordable natural gas and our commitment to the sanctity of contracts. A lot of those things don't happen around the world, which is why you're seeing the economy get through the pandemic without plummeting into a deep depression and a recession. And so we need to protect those American advantages and satisfy the demands of our customers and continue to decarbonize. And it's tricky But I don't think anybody should think that everybody's not all in. We've all made it clear that we're all in. You can't dictate the pace of technology. You just can't. You said it takes decades. It does. I mean, we mandated cellulosic ethanol in our gas tanks. We still don't have it. And we mandated that as government policy, in 1995 or 2005. Yeah. So I think we have to recognize and embrace and accelerate the pace of technology, ensure that we have funding for an innovation agenda, update our regulatory frameworks to reimagine the utilities of the future, which are going to require a different business model. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to leave anybody the impression to think this is free. It is not free, and we as government and taxpayers can't pay for all this. So it has to happen with incentives and innovation alongside.
So could I just jump in real quick?
I want to let Calvin, I thought Calvin was going to say.
I was just going to say, I would add a fifth pillar, security on our overall system.
I'm glad you said that in the nation's capital.
That's exactly right. And I would also say to you that in some of our jurisdictions, just understand, we have customers asking for connections to natural gas, and we're replacing propane and oil. So understand, when we talk about environmental footprint, this is huge for us. And when I sit back and talk about our path to clean on the technology side, I have creating zero emissions within the Exelon footprint, which we came out with and we said we'd achieve it by 2050. I have a clear line of sight to 80% reduction. Wow. But by working with EPRI, working with AGA, I'm confident that we'll get to that last 20% through technology. But if you were to sit back and ask me today, is it there? Absolutely not. And I think the other piece of this is that recognizing that I can get 80%, some others would say, why are you moving so slow in 2050 when other utilities have sat back and said, we're going to achieve it by 2030, 2035. I would sit back, always get into the details. We will be measurable and it's attainable. So therefore, when we came out with our goal by 2050, at any point, any of you can ask, where are you guys? What have you done? And I can tell you each step. It's so much more than just setting a goal. It's achieving the goal. And I would just ask, if we're going to have the conversation, accountability is a big piece of that. And we were very careful and slow to come out and say, this is what we're going to achieve, without knowing we can get there. So therefore, I don't hesitate to tell you, I have a clear line of sight to 80%. That last 20% is the partnerships that we're talking about here.
Thank you for that. And clearly, in your mix, one thing we haven't talked about is nuclear energy and how critically important it will be for all of those objectives that we've mentioned. Sure. Mark.
Well, Colette, I agree with you that the transition is not simple. And Karen, I agree with you, we can't flip a switch and do it overnight. The good news is we don't have to. I mean, DC's climate commitment is carbon neutrality by 2050. PEPCO says they can do it at 1% a year or less even. So it can be done. Now, in terms of it's not going to be free, that's true. Electrification is not free, nor are fossil fuels free, right? I mean, I've said this several times. Just as is zero progress on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, AltaGas wants to charge $5 billion. So the question isn't what's free and what do we spend money on? The question is, what do we invest our money in? Do we invest it in clean energy, or do we invest it in fossil fuels that pollute our climate and pollute our homes and are bad for our health? Obviously, you can tell from the way I framed the question, I think the answer to that question is pretty obvious.
Thank you, Mark. We have just a couple of other minutes. I don't even know where to start with all of these questions. Here's one, and I think we're going to know what our panelists think about this question by virtue of what you've heard today. But because someone took the time to write it, I'm going to ask it. Cooking with gas is a 1930s slogan still used by many who enjoy gas stoves. New cold climate heat pumps are impressing customers with their ability to electrically power at home heat and cool. How do consumer preferences factor into the conversation? Karen, I think we know where you are on this one.
Well, heating a home with a gas furnace, a highly efficient gas furnace, is the most cost-effective way to heat your home. And to Calvin's point, up in the Northeast, we're adding customers up there. Why? because we're replacing and getting rid of oil furnaces and propane furnaces. And so that's another incremental progress. And the heat pumps, they haven't proven, but that's where R&D can continue to be used to improve their efficiency and their effectiveness. They're not there yet, we just have to admit it. I'm not saying they'll never be there, but we don't see that as a necessary option right now because we're investing in those higher efficient appliances. We also invest $4 million every day in our customers' ability to be more efficient. So windows, insulation, all of the things that they would like to have, we invest in those for them to help them reduce their own carbon footprint. So I'll just underscore the point that we're making progress. All of us are impatient, but I don't think impatience should mean elimination of options. I don't think that the only option on the table should be we've got to double the size of the electric grid in order to achieve decarbonization. We need better options than just one option.
Thank you. Well, I want to bring our discussion to a close. As you could see, we could talk about this issue for 4 more hours. And I'm supposed to be a moderator, and then I've kind of become a bit of a speaker as well. These are critical issues. And I'm grateful that we have men and women like the ones on this dais today who are passionate about their positions, who believe strongly in the work that they are doing, and are committed today more than ever to help us achieve these goals in which we commonly believe and that we embrace. I want to take an opportunity to thank Chairman Willie Phillips from the DC Public Service Commission, Chairman Thompson, Commissioner Thompson,